So we pick up with where we left off with the interaction of prey and predators and plants. There's a general principle in biology that it's called the competitive exclusion principle. And what it says basically is that two complete competitors cannot coexist. And what a complete competitor is two very similar plants that grow in very much the same way, that live in the same area. They cannot coexist with each other. One will wipe the other out. So two complete predators will compete and one will wipe the other out. Two complete herbivores cannot coexist. One will wipe the other out. So Missouri has many species of frogs, but they're not complete competitors because they live in different parts of the yard, or they live in different parts of the pond, or they eat different bugs, or they breed at different times. They don't compete head to head. This is a real problem with invasive species because when you introduce something like a starling to North America, it is going to compete with birds that are already here, and invariably somebody's going to lose. And it turns out the starling won, and a lot of our native songbirds lost in that competition. In the British Isles, the American gray squirrel is wiping out the European red squirrel. They're complete competitors. Even plants can be complete competitors. Bush honeysuckle is a complete competitor with many small species of plants like phlox that grows in the woods. The honeysuckle wins, the phlox loses. Kudzu, which grows down in the southeast, which is a competitive vine that grows over everything, is a complete competitor. When it comes to most other plants, it wipes them out. So, in general, anytime an invasive species is added to an area, the potential for destruction is pretty high. Humans kind of are an invasive species in a way in the globe. Because of our intervention, negative intervention in areas, large regions of the Mediterranean Sea are in danger of collapse. Large sections of coral reef down in the Caribbean are in danger of collapse. So that's here, the Mediterranean here, and the Eastern Atlantic. The Caribbean down here. Sections of the Pacific Ocean are in trouble because of overfishing. The whole region around Madagascar is in trouble. There are regions terrestrially on every continent where whole ecosystems are in trouble, usually because of human encroachment. And it could be also, we're talking development, we're also talking overhunting. It's just humans interacting in negative ways with areas. Hotspots, though, aren't just the loss of a species. It's a whole region and the whole collection of species. It's all the plants and all the animals, in an area that we're in danger of losing because we're competing head to head with stuff that lives there. And of course, humans are winning, the other animals are losing. So when you look at individual populations of animals, you find that every animal is pretty much finely tuned to do what it has to do to survive, reproduce in its native environment. Hawks have talons and sharp beaks and incredible eyesight to see their prey and feed on it, and that's what you see in the picture here with the hawk on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you've got predators like the bobcat, well-suited big ear, sharp fangs, excellent muscles, rapid speed, good reflexes, but the hare that this animal caught is also finely tuned and well adapted. It has excellent ears, a decent eyesight, incredible speed. It can hop rather than run. These are all, we call these strategies. Predators have strategies, which include things like fangs and claws and ears and eyes and camouflage fur color, whereas prey have survival strategies, which is camouflage fur color, excellent hearing, decent eyesight, rapid speed. Even plants have autotrophic strategies, producer strategies for anchoring themselves in the ground, good tubes for conducting water, excellent broad leaves for capturing sunlight, etc., etc. And those are the things that allow them to survive in a competitive environment. It is your strategies that work for you. No species, no population lives on its own. everything's interacting with everything else, and it's not always predator-prey. Symbiosis is an intimate living relationship between different life forms. That's this term here. Symbiosis comes in several flavors: parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. Those also can drastically affect population dynamics. The only time the world population of humans has fallen in human history was during the bubonic plague, and that was a parasitic relationship between, we think, a bacteria and humans. So it's not always the obvious competition or predation that where you see animals competing or animals eating other animals. Also, it's ticks and fleas and lice and bacteria and fungi that are living on animals that affect their health and affect their survivorship. All of those things are important, and all animals have strategies to limit negative interactions to increase their chances of survival. This relationship that's depicted in the picture here is actually a mutualistic relationship. This is a wild carnation. These pink flowers are actually carnations. Carnations, only wild ones, only make a single ring of petals. What we have here is a hawk moth with a long proboscis that's actually stuck down into the flower and it's sucking up nectar. What you don't know is that this proboscis is going to pick up some pollen from these little anthers that you see on the flower reproductive parts here. And then this moth will go to another flower and it'll spread the pollen there, and then the plant will get a chance to reproduce with another flower without even moving to that other flower. It's a pretty ingenious strategy on the part of the plant. So parasitic relationships, as I've mentioned, are not a positive relationship. Humans have survival strategies. We have an immune system that is an incredible, complex system to stop viruses from hurting us, but there are always strains of viruses that can find weaknesses in the immune system and exploit them. The viruses don't want to kill people. They simply want to reproduce more viruses, but in so doing, they can cause morbidity, which is illness, and mortality, which is death, in the human population. We spend a lot of money and a lot of time trying to predict what kind of viruses are going to be bad, each year. So as we move forward, the next point we have to drive home is that lots of species actually live in groups, and group strategies are very macro-emergent in their effect on the entire group. So the baboons on the left, they actually exhibit a macro-emergence just because all the parasites that live on them, that are living in their fur, as well as predators that are trying to feed on them, are deterred by living in a group as opposed to living individually. Individually, a baboon is very vulnerable. It cannot pick parasites off its back, and it is very vulnerable to predators. It only has eyes on one side of its head. But when they live in a troop like this, they can groom each other and pull parasites off of them. And on top of that, they are all looking around in different directions, so predators have a very hard time sneaking up on them. That is a macro-emergent benefit to the whole group. So what they don't have individually, just because they socially interact, they get when they're in a group. Humans are the same way. We benefit very much. We wouldn't have iPhones and cars and houses and things to live in if we didn't all share skills. We all can't be carpenters. We all can't be iron workers. We all can't be cell phone makers. So we trade, and we enjoy the benefits of each other's skills. Elephants, the females actually live in herds. The males don't. Females protect the calves by living in herds, and the females protect one another. That's a macro-emergent system. They very much benefit collectively over what they would have singularly living on their own. So as we move down, there is also a last concept that we have to drive home, and it's the keystone species concept. There are some species that benefit everybody rather than just one or two others by living somewhere. And the beaver is one in North America. Beavers create dams, which doesn't sound like a big deal, except that a beaver dam holds back water, and in droughts, that may be the only water supply for miles. And so not only do mammals survive, but fish survive, and all the animals that feed on the fish survive, which include mammals and predatory birds, and not to mention all the invertebrates that live on in the pond on algae that feed the fish. And then there's frogs and salamanders that share the pond. The beaver is a keystone species, and what a keystone species is a species that many other species depend on. And if you remove that keystone species, you have the sudden loss of a whole collection of other species. The beaver's one, believe it or not. I have to scroll all the way down to the coyote and the roadrunner here. There are whole cartoons about the roadrunner and the coyote. As it turns out, the coyote is a keystone species in the chaparral communities of California. If the coyotes are lost from an area because of human hunting and trapping and poisoning, the roadrunners all die. Turns out that with coyotes in an area, you also will have roadrunners. And the reason is roadrunners nest on the ground. And coyotes are eating the predators that actually feed on the roadrunner eggs. So if there are coyotes in an area, the coyotes generally won't bother the roadrunners or their eggs, but they will bother the skunks and the raccoons that eat roadrunner eggs. So if there are coyotes in an area, there aren't enough then prey, raccoons and skunks, to eat all the roadrunners' eggs. But if there are no coyotes, the raccoons and skunks will overpopulate the area and destroy all the young roadrunners, so that then all the old roadrunners eventually die off and roadrunners disappear from the landscape. So many ground nesting birds depend on the coyote in that way, and so the coyote is considered a keystone species in its environment in Southern California. So now, us as humans, we are an invasive species in many ways across the globe. What you have on the left there is the elimination of an entire community, all the trees and all the animals that were benefiting from the trees, all gone because we clear-cut the forest. You can see the clear-cut from the satellite image of the Amazon basin there. The Amazon rainforest will be gone within the next 50 years if some countries don't do something to stem the tide of destruction. So humans can potentially have a very negative impact on an area. Because of, usually it's just exploitation of an area. It's often agriculture, we're growing crops, or we are building houses and communities, and so we're cutting down the native landscape and putting in our malls and our roads and our shopping centers, or our acres and acres of crops, and as a result you lose what was growing there in the whole collection of plants and animals that were there. And that creates the biodiversity hotspots that are increasing in number around the globe. Just so that you remember from the first semester, biogeography is the study of the distribution of plants and animals. And biogeography is not random. Plants and animals are distributed across the globe in interesting ways based on, generally speaking, continental movement. Marsupials are native mostly to Australia. There are some marsupials native to North America, and that's the possum, and South America, but they've been wiped out elsewhere because they were competitors with other mammals, and complete competitors cannot coexist. So when the more advanced mammals evolved, they wiped out marsupials except in a few areas where the marsupials did not have competition with those mammals. Since then, we've accidentally introduced rabbits to Australia, and beavers, believe it or not, to South America. And beavers in North America are a keystone species. They're an invasive species in South America and are decimating whole forests because they're flooding areas that are not adapted for periodic flooding. So what can be beneficial in one continent, that same species can be highly detrimental in another. So the last things here, every organism has a survival strategy. We talked about this. Predators have strategies, prey have strategies, plants have strategies, and those strategies sometimes change as the year goes on. So snowshoe hares have white fur in the wintertime, which camouflages them against the snow, but they have brown fur in the summertime, which camouflages them against the leaves. And I have never encountered a snowshoe hare in the wintertime, but I have encountered them in the summer, and I've almost stepped on them. They will sit still, and they're so well camouflaged you will not see them until you are upon them. And this snowshoe hare looks really small, but it's actually a very large animal. It's 4 times the size of a cottontail rabbit, which grows here in the lives here in the state of Missouri. So survival strategies can include changing your body color or coloration patterns to the system. Many organisms are environmentally influenced in other ways. Siamese cats are dark colored at the tips of their bodies, and many other animals are like that too. And that has to do with chemical reactions in the skin uh, working better at cooler temperatures than at warmer temperatures. And so the Siamese cat represents function of the enzyme tyrosinase. Mutant tyrosinase works in cooler areas of the body, but it doesn't work well in the other areas of the body. And then as a result, the cat has an unusual color like that. Most animals, wild animals, are darker on top and lighter underneath to countershade so that when the sun shines on them, they will look fairly evenly colored and their outline will not stand out. So therefore, prey can't be seen by predators, and predators can't be seen by prey. So all animals usually are strategized color-wise somehow to allow them to survive either predation or they have to be camouflaged so that they can eat prey. They can find prey and eat prey. Now, genetic diversity is a big deal. We just had an assembly. We had a Founders Day that was all talking about genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is humanity's only hope. Eventually, there will be diseases that sweep through the human landscape, and many humans can die in the future from parasitic interactions. The only thing that's going to save us is we cannot all be the same. We have to be different, and what works today may not work tomorrow. So who is common today? Like, for example, it may be that right now African Americans are in the minority, but 100 years from now, African Americans may be the majority. Populations change over time. Our only hope is that we can roll with the changes. We have to accept diversity and embrace it. Look what happened, and this is a potato here that's being attacked by the potato rot fungus. 1 million Irish died because of insufficient genetic diversity in just the potato crop. Right now we grow a lot of cloned crops. We use a lot of pesticides to save the crops. They didn't have pesticides back in 1848 to save the Irish potato crop. But not even pesticides always work. We need diversity. We need diversity in our crops, and we need diversity in ourselves to survive into the future. So genetic diversity is what allows humans to survive diseases like West Nile. This is an incidence map showing West Nile across the United States in 2012. In wet years, we're going to have more West Nile virus than we're going to have in dry years. And West Nile is fairly common across the Midwest, as you can see from the map. So the last things here, the Hardy-Weinberg principles are all about genetic diversity. If you'll notice on this graph, this shows the distribution of homozygous recessive individuals at every point with heterozygous and homozygous dominant individuals. So when the species distribution is somewhere in the middle, when you have heterozygotes, homozygous dominant, and homozygous recessive individuals mixed, you have a fairly balanced population. If the homozygous recessive individuals are vulnerable all of a sudden to a new invasive species disease, they'll die out, but you'll have heterozygotes and homozygous dominant individuals surviving and carrying on the population. It's always dangerous to remove genetic diversity from a population by overhunting, because in the end, you weaken the genetic diversity of the population and the hope that the population will survive into the future. This is what happens when you have a cloned lawn. This lawn right here is sustaining heavy grub damage because there's no genetic diversity in the lawn. So that lawn must be maintained by pesticides. If you don't put pesticides on the lawn, then you're going to lose grass to grubs that look like this. These grub worms are causing these brown patches in the lawn. So, um, I'm sorry, this lawn here is being damaged by dollar spot fungus, but the grub damage looks the same way. So these grubs and dollar spot fungus cause this kind of damage on a monoculture lawn. So most people put down all kinds of herbicides on the lawn, which endangers, uh, the chemistry of their kids, their dogs, their cats that walk on the lawns. So in the end, genetic diversity is a very beneficial thing to have in a system. We want genetic diversity in our lawns. We want it in our food supply. We want it in ourselves to make us a hardier species. So if you have questions about this unit, please email me those questions or post them in the chat room, and I'll be able to address them there, or I'll address them through emails, or I can answer them in class. Your test will be not this week, but next week, the week just before the AP Biology test.